Hello, this is Miller at the Wee Market Co-op, and today we're going to make a presentation meal for Thanksgiving or Christmas or New Year's, and I call it a turkey squash. There is no turkey in it. It's a squash stuffed like a turkey that you would do on Thanksgiving. I picked out a 10-pound squash at the farmer's market a couple weeks ago. We have some really nice squash at the co-op right now that are about 12 to 14 pounds. You want a squash that you can hollow out the inside, and then we're going to stuff it with a wild rice dressing. Let's talk about our ingredients. The squash, you want a semi-squat squash. Blue Hubbard, I've done them with that and it's really nice. This is a type of a Blue Hubbard. When it cooks, the top will come up a little bit from the stuffing that is cooking, and it'll look like you could put it on the centerpiece of your table. It's going to be stuffed with a wild rice stuffing. This is wild rice, naturally harvested in Minnesota. We carry it at the co-op. A wild rice variety that is hand harvested and hand parched, and that's what this is. And then there's also a wild rice variety that is cultivated, and they're usually really dark kernels, black kernels. The hand harvested, hand parched wild rice will cook very quickly. And you can kind of see that it's not black. The black wild rice really does take about 45 minutes to cook. This takes about less than 20 minutes. We're gonna par cook the wild rice. We're gonna use celery, onion, and mushrooms. We're gonna cook those, saute them, and then mix it with the parboiled wild rice. Tiffany at the co-op today suggested using nutritional yeast, so I'm gonna use a little bit of that. You could also use some miso or umeboshi paste. And I don't think I'm gonna use those two, but I just thought I'd mention them. Our dinner is going to be a vegan variety, so we'll use some olive oil to saute the vegetables. There will be no meat products in it, although you could make it with a pork sausage or a chicken sausage. There'll be no butter in it, even though I prefer squash cooked with butter. We're gonna do it without that. So this is a vegan meal, and your guests will really like it. Okay, so we've got our pan with water, and as you notice, we're in a ghost kitchen because the co-op does not have an oven big enough to cook that squash. So it's a fun place, this is a fun place to make your dinner. When you're putting on a meal and you're making a statement of bounty, a statement that you've gotten the ingredients, so pick the best ingredients you can. Notice I bought a new apron at an art show yesterday from a friend of mine that does these wonderful paintings. The lady's name is Linda Nelson Bryan, and she does a lot of art shows in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So we're gonna take my favorite wild rice and parboil it. Okay, while we're cooking our wild rice, we're gonna open this squash and hollow it out. And you've done Halloween pumpkin, so it's basically the same thing. You'll want to create a top. Sometimes you have to even get a screwdriver in there to pry the top off. You don't want to crack the squash. Now, for some of these squashes, I've mentioned this before, you can save the seeds for the next year. If you get a nice squash that isn't so hybridized that it won't turn out to be the same thing. Looks like I've got it pretty much open now. Okay, so I used the knife until it cleanly cut around the edges, And then I've got this knife because I didn't want to break the knife, and it popped right out. So you see we have an interior opening. Now you want to clean it out on the inside. Get out as much of those seeds as you can. Okay, we've got that emptied out, and you see we have a nice large cavity. We put that in our baking dish, and we'll put the top back on for the time being. Notice the seeds, you can save those. That was not very many seeds for a squash. If you take a bigger baking dish, you could add Brussels sprouts or potatoes as this is cooking. So like about an hour into cooking, you can put a vegetable in and you'd have that to serve too. Let's take a look at the wild rice. We've got our wild rice in the water and it's boiling. Now, one thing really nice about wild rice is that you can boil it in as much water as you want. It's not like regular rice where you have to have 2 cups of water, 1 cup of rice. Wild rice can be as much water as you want. And it's better with more water than not. Something to remember when you're doing this dish is that if you make too much wild rice, that's fine because you can always use it for wild rice soup or something. If you have too many vegetables that you cooked, that's fine too because you can always stuff them into another pan and put it in the oven and cook it, or just save it for a rainy day. So we got onion. Okay, we put the onions in the pan to saute them. We're working on, which I'm not too used to, is gas, which is a lot faster than electric. So we're going to be moving along here pretty quick. Now we'll be putting in the celery. You can substitute brown rice, white rice for this dish, or you can mix it half and half if you want to. We have a rice at the co-op called forbidden rice. You could use forbidden rice and wild rice. They'll cook a little bit differently, so you'll have 2 pots boiling instead of 1. So there's your celery. And you can kind of hear it steaming now. I have to get a spoon. So what we want to do is we want to just get these where they're slightly cooked down. I'm using a brown mushroom that we have at the co-op, and they are nice and thick pieces. We'll get those cooking a bit. Now you need to have some salt in here, and I see the salt container. Salt brings out flavor right away, so we'll just sprinkle some salt on it. And you can kind of hear it sauteing up. Check your wild rice. The wild rice is almost done. That's been less than 10 minutes. We'll let it go a little bit longer, then we'll cool it off and start mixing it with the savories, the onion, celery, and mushroom. You could put carrots in here, you could put rutabagas, You could put parsnips, any kind of those nice root vegetables will be excellent for this kind of a dish. I wouldn't necessarily do potatoes. I think potatoes, I'm just not feeling potatoes in this dish. But remember, we are going to be cooking it in the oven for about 2 hours. And so we're just looking at getting the initial sear, as we call it, right now. And I think we're there. We're going to dump our savories with onions, celery, mushrooms in a bowl so that we can mix things. I have wooden spatulas at home. They don't make nearly as much noise. Okay, there's part of our savory. Now we're going to increase the flavor quotient by adding a little bit of this nutritional yeast. So we're just going to sprinkle it on the top. That was about maybe 2 teaspoons. You can smell the nutritional yeast. When I grew up, I was putting nutritional yeast on popcorn, and it was so good. Nutritional yeast and chili powder, a little bit of cumin on a big pot of popped corn. I loved that. Okay, now I'm going to go over and get the wild rice and mix that in too. So we got our wild rice parboiled, and you can see that it's absorbed a lot of that liquid. And you'll just mix into this however much you think you're going to be using up. Remember, you're at the point right now, you could easily turn this into soup. Add a little chicken and you've got chicken wild rice soup. Make a nice gravy for it. You could even make it into a casserole. Okay. Now I think we want some black pepper and a few more spices, maybe some thyme. Black pepper and thyme sounds good to me. You could also put in some poultry seasoning. The wild rice is going to puff up a little bit more, and it'll all cook inside the squash. So we can take a break now and get our other spices in. We're back at our dressing. Now this dressing is super simple, like you would if you had a turkey. So we're going to be putting some thyme in it and some freshly ground black pepper. And we'll stir it up. Ooh, it smells good. Now, grab your squash and start filling it. You could also put in like cranberries in this dressing, or raisins, or golden raisins, or plums. You can put about anything in. Nuts you could use, like almonds or cashews. Now you see I'm just filling this cavity up. And you notice I didn't use all my dressing. It's because that's all I have. Now I'm putting the top back on. We're going to preheat the oven to 350 and put this inside. You can always put some aluminum foil around the bottom, but that's all you do. It's 350 and for an hour, hour and a half. It should register around 200 degrees on the inside, just like you would do it a regular turkey. Okay, so let's get that in the oven. We just took it out of the oven. It's been in there for an hour and 45 minutes. We had it on 350 and on convection. So it probably shaved about a half hour off. And you can kind of see how it lifted up. So when you go to serve it, you'll take this part off, and then people will take out the dressing and some flesh and put it on your plate, and it's done.